Somebody else can do it. In this case, it is the administrator of the Maritime Administration, Captain Steve Carmel, and the chairperson of the Federal Maritime Commission, Laura DiBello, talking about the future of U.S. maritime. We're going to listen to their opening statements and the one question that was asked repeatedly during this hearing about the Jones Act. If you're new to this channel, hey, take a moment, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell so be alerted about new videos as they come out. Here's the story yesterday in GCAPTAIN by Mike Schuller. The Trump administration's push to rebuild America's maritime industry moved back into the spotlight Wednesday as lawmakers reviewed fiscal year 2027 budget requests from the Maritime Administration and Federal Maritime Commission, with officials outlining plans to expand the U.S. flag fleet, modernize shipyards, strengthen sea lift capacity, and bolster oversight of global shipping markets. So these two entities, the Maritime Administration, Federal Maritime Commission, have their roots back to the 1916 Shipping Act, which created something called the U.S. Shipping Board. That was further refined in 1920 with the Merchant Marine Act of that year, commonly known as the Jones Act. Believe it or not, the Jones Act does more than cabotage. In this case, it really empowered what became the U.S. Shipping Board, which eventually is split, and it's split in 1961, into these two entities, the Maritime Administration, which oversees domestic U.S. shipping, and the Federal Maritime Commission, which oversees U.S. international trade. The Maritime Administration Commissioner, Steve Carmel, is appointed by the President of the United States and serves at his pleasure. He goes through a Senate confirmation. The Federal Maritime Commission is a separate independent commission where the commissioners are appointed by the President. You have to have 3 of one party and 2 of the other party. And they serve for terms of 5 years, and they serve regardless. They can't be fired as commissioners. So at the hearing yesterday, you didn't just have Laura DiBello, chairperson of the commission there. You actually had 3 of the other 5 commissioners there sitting behind her. On the far right in red, that is Rebecca Dye. She is a stalwart in the Federal Maritime Commission, has been serving for quite a long time. Max Vedich behind Laura DiBello, and then right next to Max is former chairperson of the commission, Daniel Maffei. Maffei had been chairperson during the period of the Biden administration, and even next to Maffei is Corey Sink, one of the leading attorneys over at the Federal Maritime Commission. I actually know all of them, so it's always kind of cool when you see people you know. So let's go ahead and listen to the opening statement by Captain Carmel about the Maritime Administration.
Good morning, Chairman Ezell, Ranking Member Carbajal, and members of the subcommittee. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today. There's a great deal happening at MARAD as we work on the issues we have discussed many times and begin implementing the Maritime Action Plan. Challenges remain, but we have a vision, a path forward, and we are executing.
So Captain Carmel is referring to what is called the Maritime Action Plan. And the Maritime Action Plan was put out by the White House in February of this year. They had been developing it since the president's executive order came out shortly after his second inauguration. Now, in the Maritime Action Plan, there are 4 key pillars. 1, rebuild U.S. shipbuilding capacity and capabilities. 2nd, reform workforce education and training. 3rd, protect the maritime industrial base. And 4th, national security, economic security, and industrial resilience. And you're going to hear those 4 pillars throughout this hearing.
The war with Iran highlighted some of our successes while we still have areas where we still have room to improve. The best example is the tanker security program. TSP tankers have been fueling both MSC oilers and Navy carriers at sea, continuing the vital service they began in the Red Sea. This is not demonstrator operations, this is real-world contingency operations.
So Captain Carmel is talking about the tanker security program. So there is a couple of programs that the Maritime Administration oversees that supports U.S. ships in international trade. Understand, the U.S. Merchant Marine, the deep draft Merchant Marine, those involved in both international trade and domestic trade, in over 1,000 gross tons cargo vessels, you're only talking about 190 ships. So it's a fairly small Merchant Marine, 23rd in the world. In the international trade, there's only about 90 ships, and a lot of them are in one of these programs, either the Cable Security Fleet, in which there's 2, the Maritime Security Program, where there's 60, or the Tanker Security Program, where there's 10. And Tanker Security Program has been in the news quite a bit We had the incident involving Stena Immaculate off the coast of England, where the ship was rammed and caught fire. And then we had Stena Imperative, which was challenged by the Iranians before the war started and actually came under attack and was in the port of Bahrain and actually suffered a hit either from a missile or potentially from a interceptor that hit the vessel. Now, what Steve is referring to specifically here is the logistic support giving to the U.S. military out in the Indian Ocean. I did a whole video on this on Logistics War, where we talked about how Military Sealift Command and the U.S. Merchant Marine are supporting vessels out on the high seas. And in particular, what he is highlighting there are how tanker security programs, commercial tankers, providing direct refueling to ships out on the high seas. Now, typically this is done by ships of the Military Sealift Command, but what a console tanker, a consolidation tanker, does is it allows you to receive a fueling rig from an aircraft carrier, from a large deck amphibious vessel like the Tripoli, or from Military Sealift Command oilers and replenishment vessels, and you can transfer the fuel from the commercial tanker over to the Navy or MSC ship. This allows you to keep your ships at sea for a longer period of times. Normally, you would have to take that MSC oiler, run back to port, and refuel. With a console tanker, you can stay at sea longer. This was a bedrock principle developed by the U.S. during World War II. We kept this idea going until the end of the Cold War in the 1990s, got rid of it, and then in 2015 started to resurrect this idea, and it's been back ever since.
This is not demonstrator operations, this is real-world contingency operations. 2 of those ships are now being fitted with fuel delivery systems, essentially a standard MSC-type tension refueling at sea rig, so they function as oilers themselves. A little slower, a little fatter, but with twice the fuel capability at less than 1/10 the cost, delivered in months of steady years. This is a huge plus-up in MSC capability.
So this concept is another old concept that's coming back. Late 1980s, early 1990s, 2 commercial tankers, the Gianella and the Mathiasen, were fitted with what's called a Modular Fuel Distribution System, MFDS. There's got to be an acronym. There's always an acronym. The MFDS system allowed those tankers to actually refuel Navy combatants because they had the rigs on board. Now, you had to fly out crews to man those rigs, usually Navy reservists or MSC crews out to do that. But what this will allow is, instead of just refueling aircraft carriers, large deck amphibs, and MSC underway replenishment ships, you can do smaller vessels. Huge capability. It was stupid to get rid of it. Now it's coming back.
And yet, for as much as they prove their value day in and day out, these tankers are short the one thing the whole fleet needs: cargo. There simply isn't enough to support more than the 10 ships in the program today, despite being authorized for 20. That is the heart of it. Any renewed maritime capability must be built on cargo, not just government cargo, because there isn't enough of that either. It must be built on access to our nation's commerce. A shipbuilding program without structured access to consistent cargo will not produce ships.
So if you want a drinking game with Administrator Carmel, every time he says the word cargo, take a drink. You will be drunk within a matter of moments, because that is his mantra. The mantra here is you can have all the ships in the U.S. Merchant Marine you want, but if you have nothing to stuff in them, that's a problem. Now, this shouldn't be a problem because cargo is at record levels. I mean, there's a shortage of tankers on the world's oceans, and we're moving more cargo than ever before. The problem is you got to get it into American ships. For the Maritime Security Program, it's not as bad because a lot of the ships in the Maritime Security Program are part of larger entities, Maersk Lines, Hauppauge, CMA, CGM, although not all of them. And in the Tanker Security Program, tankers work by going basically like Ubers. They go out on the tramp market, they go on the spot market, and they find cargo. And one of the things that's happened, especially during this Trump administration, the second one, is a lot of curtailing of government cargo, especially aid cargo. And so what Carmel is talking about here is really the need to get more cargo onto these ships. Now, there are ways to do that.
We actually do have answers to the TSP cargo problem that do not rely on government cargo. We just need a coordinated all-of-government effort to make it happen, and we look forward to working with you for that.
I would have really loved a little more information on that. Okay, what's your plan? How are you going to do this? It really doesn't come up during the opening. It doesn't really come up during the hearing. And this is a really important element. How are you going to get cargo onto U.S. ships? I got ideas. I mean, let's waive tariffs on cargo on U.S. flag ships. If you want to get away from tariffs, put them on a U.S. flag ship. That seems pretty good to me. Let's go ahead and do that, since this president is really hopping on tariffs quite a bit. That seems like a mechanism. But I'm interested to hear how the Maritime Administration is going to put this together.
There is also where Ready Reserve Force creates problems. We are in active conversation with General Reed and Transcom on alternatives. But two issues stand out. First, every RRF activation cannibalizes the cargo MSP carriers need to survive. MSP hasn't been funded at the authorized level for some time. Preference cargo keeps shrinking, and now the carriers are competing with the RRF for what's left.
So Captain Carmel is talking about another issue here. The United States, the Maritime Administration, maintains a fleet called the Ready Reserve Force. These are ships laid up in ports along the west, east, and Gulf Coast of the United States. Roughly around 43 vessels right now. The numbers fluctuate here as ships come in and out of the fleet. But these ships are designed to be activated in a period of 5 days, and in case of a national emergency or war, they can be activated in 5 days, crews put on them. They maintain a small, about 1/3 of the crew necessary on board. You plus the crew up, sail it to a port of embarkation, load military equipment on it, and you sail it. The idea is these fill the role of the surge of military cargo across, while the U.S. commercial fleet will handle the sustainment. The problem has been in that right now, while we speak, there are 3 Ready Reserve Force vessels out moving cargo. One's in an exercise in the Pacific, 2 are over in the Mediterranean. And one of the big problems has been that the U.S. One of the problems is that the Transportation Command, this is the organization set up by the U.S. military to handle the movement of cargo for the Department of Defense, will periodically use RRF ships, Ready Reserve Force ships, instead of getting commercial ships out on the commercial market. And there's a lot of reasons behind it. I will tell you that lots of times they don't offer or they don't bid out the contract till too late, and so there's no commercial ship available, so they go to the Ready Reserve Force. You also want to exercise the Ready Reserve Force, and the problem is it's competition. The Ready Reserve Force was designed and created back in 1977, back when we had a pretty large merchant marine, and the idea was the Ready Reserve Force would be able to pick up the slack immediately and free up the U.S. commercial merchant marine to do other business. It has kind of morphed and changed over the time. The biggest problem with the Ready Reserve Force today is age. This fleet, again, is about 45 years old on average. So the ships are old. They're actually taking ships out. All the steam-powered ships are being laid up, so the fast sea lift ships are gone. The Cape Eyes are being phased out. And even though there is a recapitalization program to bring ships in, it hasn't been entirely successful. Some of the ships brought in were old to begin with. There were 2 roll-on, roll-off ships brought in. They were already over 25 years old, and only one of the ships has actually been able to be incorporated into the fleet. Add to it, we're just seeing the aging out of that fleet. So big issue about how the U.S. Merchant Marine supports the military in time of national defense. And he's already talked about 2 of them. One of them is this tanker support. The other is this dry cargo Ready Reserve Force support.
Second, manpower. We are roughly in balance for steady state shipping today, which means by definition, we do not have mariners to crew a sustained RRF surge. This makes the current RRF manpower structure untenable. On RRF, though, we published today an RFI that would fundamentally alter how we might approach RRF recap, leveraging private capital and accelerating the shipbuilding agenda. This is a substantially new and innovative way of dealing with the RRF. We look forward to working with Transcom and you to find a path to make this and other innovative programs work.
So I have not yet seen that request for information that Captain Carmel is talking about. So they're trying to create a new way. I'm not a big fan of the Ready Reserve Force as it exists today. I don't like the idea of buying and building new ships to put into the reserve force. I like an active reserve force. I like the idea of having active ships out there that you can call upon and draw upon. So I'm really interested to see what this request for information is asking for. The other element that he discusses there is mariners, and mariners is a really key one. So just had a conversation with a key official over in the U.S. Coast Guard about credentialing for U.S. merchant mariners. Now, credentialing for U.S. merchant mariners is terrible. I mean, there's no other way to say it. It is terrible. It has suffered because of the shutdown in the government. So when we had the Department of Homeland Security have their shutdowns, we know about the TSA, but the other problem was merchant marine credentials. They could not get their licenses updated. The site for maritime credentialing is located in the state that we associate with maritime all the time, West Virginia. That's right. In the mountains of West Virginia is the site for U.S. merchant marine credentialing. You can thank Senator Byrd for that, for putting that site up there. And there's been huge problems. Everything from data to information to printing, you name it. The different styles of credentialing that have come out is massive. However, one of the things that the Coast Guard has started to tackle, and they're slowly beginning to do it, although it does have issues with it, is improving this. It is very difficult to get your licenses. I have an inactive license. If I wanted to activate my license right now, it would take, I don't even know how long, but I'll give you the example that the former Deputy Maritime Administrator, Sang Yi, got his license reactivated, and it took him anywhere between, I think, 6 to 9 months to get it activated. And he's the Deputy Administrator of Maritime Administration. So if you're just interested in getting your license up to date, it's really, really difficult. So mariners is key, and we are at a crucial shortage of mariners. And the other thing is we can't even track how many mariners are out there because everything is done in a system whereby you can't pull data from it. So we don't know how many merchant mariners we are short.
I also ask the committee to remember that as trade evolves, data itself is not cargo. The United States runs about a $660 billion data deliverable exports that more than rides on U.S. flagships. It moves on subsea cables. We have completely outsourced the ability to lay and repair that cable system. Outsourcing only works for as long as the other side stays willing to do it. This is a real strategic and economic vulnerability.
So Steve is mentioning the other aspect there, which is the cable security fleet, which is nice to call it a fleet. It's 2 ships. We need more cable security vessels. We need more ships able to lay cables, and we need more to support them. However, what we're seeing is a reduction in that. Matter of fact, we just saw the National Science Foundation have to announce that they're curtailing U.S. Basically research underneath the world's oceans. They're pulling arrays up from around the world. Now, these are commercial, used for scientific purposes, but they do have a kind of secondary military feature to them. I'm going to do a whole video on it because it's a really fascinating topic. But we need more than the 2 ships currently in the cable security program.
Finally, MARAD has launched a program for small nuclear reactors and commercial ship program. It would be a serious mistake to treat SMRs as a technology trick. Same trade architecture, different ship type. For more than a century, the shape of global trade has been first set by the cost of fuel, how fast ships go, how they route, and how big they get, where cargo concentrates. SMRs break that constraint, take fuel cost out of the equation, and the whole network reoptimizes around something else, speed and flexibility, for example. Optimal ship size will likely change as economies of scale calculations are upended. This could be as transformative as containerization and a real path to compete with China on terms we set. Whoever architects the new system will hold a dominant position in global trade for decades. The intent of the RFI is to ensure that it is us.
So the small modular reactor system, I think, is great. I mean, I've been pushing this for a long time. I think this is a technology that the U.S. can embrace. If we look at the history of the U.S. maritime sector, where the U.S. maritime sector excels is when we are on the forefront of a technology, whether it's Baltimore Clippers and clipper ships, schooners, whether it's diesel for fuel for propulsion at World War I, whether it's prefabrication, containerization, super tankers, the mega cruise ship, those all came out of the United States. One of the stories out is that the aircraft carrier Ford, just back from its deployment, while it's in Norfolk, is going to use its nuclear plant to power the base. If we set up Jones Act tankers, and we're going to talk about this in a minute here with tankers, if you have ships that are working the coastwise of the United States, when they come into port, if they have nuclear plants, they can plug in and feed power back into the grid, provide backups for cities that lose power. This happened in the 1920s and 30s when cities like Tacoma lost power, and you bring in an aircraft carrier, I think it was the Lexington, came in and provided power for the city.
We did outstanding work on war risk insurance during the war with 20 policies currently outstanding, valued at over $2 billion.
So I would have been really interested in some more detail there about that war risk. 20 policies, $2 billion. Who got those policies? What's going on here? You say they're out there. Are they actually being used? We had those two ships that came out, the Fairfax Alliance and the CS Anthem. Were they given war risk through it? This used to be a bedrock sector in the Maritime Administration and its precursor, the U.S. Maritime Commission, and before that, the U.S. Shipping Board. That's what they did in the World Wars. War risk was a key part of this. It doesn't do any good to set up war risk weeks after a conflict starts. It needs to be in place day one.
The larger point is this is a system. We cannot just focus on narrow segments. Today, we are totally reliant on China for containers and cranes, for example, which continues our U.S.-built ships with containers. Without containers, U.S.-built ships are useless. So the question before us is bigger than any single program. We rebuild the American power as one integrated system. We design and control cargo ships, mariners, ports, and technology underneath of it, or keep operating inside a system someone else built. I look forward to your questions. Thank you.
So easy for me to sit here in the cheap seats and comment, but that's what I'm going to do, because one of the things I didn't hear in this entire opening statement is Jones Act, particularly the Jones Act waiver that has been in effect now for 60 days and then extended for another 90 days. I think as the job of the Maritime Administration is to promote and support the U.S. maritime sector, talking about the Jones Act would have been a proactive thing to do and lay out some ideas. We are already hearing about the shortage of tankers in the tanker security program to support the U.S. military out there. Why not include that in there? I think that is a key element here. Next, we have Chairman DeBello.
Good morning, Chairman Ezell, Ranking Member Carbajal, and members of the subcommittee. Thank you for this opportunity to appear before you today to present the Federal Maritime Commission's fiscal year 2027 budget request and to highlight our contributions to the administration's goal of revitalizing the U.S. maritime industry. I would like to acknowledge all of my fellow commissioners in the room with me today, as well as staff and those watching online. President Trump has centered the conversation of America's maritime dominance where it has the most significance, the economic impact shipping has on Americans. The President's Maritime Action Plan is helping restore America's position in the global maritime industry. The FMC's unique role in administering a program of competition enforcement, distinct but parallel to antitrust law, protects the American consumer from unfavorable and unlawful shipping conditions, promotes competition in the country's ocean supply chain, and mitigates any inflationary impacts resulting from disruptions to the supply chain. The Commission will continue to vigorously use all its statutory enforcement authorities to aggressively protect U.S. exporters and importers from potential anti-competitive behavior and promote port and marine terminal process improvements.
So Chairman DeBello is talking about a key feature. Back in 2022, the Congress passed the Ocean Shipping Reform Act. It was put forward by Representative John Garamendi from California, a Democrat, and Representative Dusty Johnson, Republican, from South Dakota. Because during 2022, one of the things that we witnessed was the ocean shipping lines, which is a big thing that the Federal Maritime Commission looks at, were basically preventing U.S. exports from going out. They were prioritizing moving empty containers across the ocean and not American exports. And ever since 2022, the Ocean Shipping Reform Act has given the FMC, the Federal Maritime Commission, more power, more bite, more money, more staffing to be able to look at this.
I support the President's fiscal year 2027 budget of $40 million for the Federal Maritime Commission.
So the budget for the Federal Maritime Commission is small. I mean, you're talking about $40 million. That is not a lot. MARAD's budget last year was $1.5 billion. This year, they're asking for $2.6 billion. However, a good portion of that new increase is discretionary money, and it's also money that's going to be coming out of the Maritime Action Plan, specifically from the Maritime Security Trust Fund. Well, that doesn't exist right now, and so you're kind of banking on money that's not there yet, which is an interesting way to kind of fund a federal agency.
This budget provides the agency the necessary resources to continue our mission-critical work to assertively investigate practices that harm the American shipping public, no matter where in the world those practices occur. Of this $40 million, north of 80% is allocated for employees and critical IT infrastructure enhancements. The remaining funds will cover the essential budgetary and operational requirements. I'm pleased to highlight for you the way our agency protects the U.S. public from financial harm and defends the integrity, stability, and security of the U.S. supply chain, and thus delivers the real results for the American people.
So this right here is absolutely key. The FMC has been proactive, vice reactive, in going after shipping lines and what they've been doing. What we saw was the shipping companies were putting these surcharges, these excess fees on there, and there was really no way to refute them. Now the Federal Maritime Commission is being proactive. They're sitting there going, before you do this, you have to show us why. So for example, when the situation developed with Iran and all of a sudden we saw fuel prices go up, the shipping lines were asking to immediately add surcharges. They were asking to waive the 30-day wait period and immediately go ahead and add this on. And the FMC pushed back, which I think is absolutely key.
The FMC has prioritized investigating and prosecuting violations of U.S. shipping laws and regulations, thus putting foreign governments, foreign carriers, and other industry stakeholders on notice that we will not hesitate to use the authorities given to us by Congress. At present, we have 5 open investigations that cover the gamut of shipping interests and concerns, both here and abroad, notably flags of convenience, choke points, discriminatory actions and/or regulations by foreign governments, and chassis.
So those investigations that Chairperson DeBello talked about, I think, are absolutely key. Flags of convenience. We're seeing that with the dark fleet. We're seeing it with these ships that are sailing out there that have no registries whatsoever. They put a Gambian, they put a Tobago, they put a Cameroon, they put a Madagascar flag on their stern, and then there's no evidence or record that those ships are technically registered. And so they're operating as lawless, stateless vessels. The choke point investigation, obviously that has reached a new level of importance with the Strait of Hormuz. Investigation into the country of Spain refusing to allow U.S. flag ships to go in there because there were cargo transloads taking place with cargo heading over to Israel. Canadian ballast water, the chassis investigation, and then enforcement proceedings against specific shipping firms out there. All of those are absolutely key for the defense of Americans and their ability to move cargo around the world.
We're currently reviewing the comments that were submitted as part of these respective investigations, as well as actively monitoring the matters to determine whether Shipping Act violations may be occurring and what further action, if any, is warranted. The FMC prevailed in an enforcement proceeding against Mediterranean Shipping Company and imposed a penalty of $22,670,000. Even more recently, our enforcement program successfully executed a compromise agreement with Maersk for a total amount of $1.9 million in civil penalties.
So going against Mediterranean Shipping Company and Maersk, those are the 2 behemoths out there, and the Federal Maritime Commission was able to do it. Now they push back. They push back individually. They push back through their advocacy group, the World Shipping Council, but the Federal Maritime Commission is going to keep pushing up against these, and what we're seeing is more and more cases being opened up. One of the things that OSRA, the Ocean Shipping Reform Act, allows is for FMC to be preemptive and actually initiate investigations.
Pivoting now to OSRA 2022, I am pleased to report that nearly all the major rulemakings required by OSRA have been completed and, when challenged, upheld in federal court. OSRA 2022 deepened the FMC's commitment to providing free and expanded dispute resolutions to the public. These are important tools for shippers of any size. With demand for consumer assistance expected to increase, the FMC plans to strengthen its capabilities by investing in technology to enhance data analysis and case management. Approximately 1 month after the start of Operation Epic Fury, the FMC received several special permission requests from vessel operating common carriers. A rejection of these requests protected U.S. shippers from sudden price spikes. Globally, only U.S. shippers benefited from this market stability and protection.
Absolutely key right there. I mean, very few countries were able to counter the shipping firms in being able to raise it. Now, the shipping firms can add surcharges. They just have to go through the approval process.
Geopolitical forces are increasingly shaping global shipping, and these challenges will continue into fiscal year 2027 and beyond. Under the Trump administration, the FMC remains steadfast in fulfilling its commitment to U.S. shippers and consumers, as evidenced by the significant increase in cases, investigations, and monitoring. As part of that commitment and our interest in ensuring stability in our U.S. foreign trades, the FMC is thoroughly engaged with its government partners, supporting interagency cooperation at every opportunity. As a consumer protection agency for the shipping public, we are dedicated to pursuing policies that bolster national and economic security for the U.S. taxpayer, but there is more work to do. Thank you for the honor to serve, and on behalf of my fellow commissioners and amazing FMC team, I appreciate your interest and look forward to answering any questions you may have.
So I thought great opening statements by both. Obviously, they're new in the position. Both have been appointed this year and are filling these roles. Now, I don't want to go through the whole hearing because there was a series of questions, but there was one question overarching that dominated this hearing.
Administrator Carmel, my first question is on the Jones Act, a pillar of domestic shipbuilding industry, at least that's what I've been told for 25 years here in Congress, and I've believed it. You know, the Maritime Action Plan, which I would agree is brings everything together in maritime in order to now to take action. I'm not seeing a lot of action on the Maritime Action Plan from the administration, but I don't think a Jones Act waiver, an unending and frankly useless Jones Act waiver, is supporting the Maritime Action Plan. It's kicking out one of the legs from under the table that the U.S. has for domestic shipbuilding.
So let me be clear about the Jones Act here for a second. What he's referring to specifically here is Section 27 of the Jones Act, which is the cabotage section, which says to move cargo between U.S. ports, you have to be U.S. owned, U.S. flagged, U.S. crewed, and U.S. built. And we have a waiver in place since March 17th that was generated because of the conflict in the Persian Gulf. Specifically, what the waiver allows, initially a 60-day waiver, then extended another 90 days, is for the movement of oil and fertilizer. That's what it's restricted to. Now, later on in this hearing, Representative Garamendi highlights the fact that a Chinese tanker, a COSCO, Chinese Overseas Shipping Container tanker, moved asphalt from Louisiana to Connecticut. Here, Representative Larson is raising this question. Now, on the Jones Act waiver itself, let me be clear. I disagree with the idea of repealing the Jones Act. I think that a repeal of the Jones Act would do massive harm and damage to the U.S. maritime infrastructure. At the same time, I think we need to massively reform the Jones Act. I think we need to do elements to it. I think the waiver has problems for a variety of reasons, not the least of which that when the waiver was signed on March 17th, there was a batch of ships that jumped on this waiver that had already loaded cargo beforehand and therefore were kind of waiting for this. I also think that there is not a accurate method to prove the waiver request, and you're going to hear that here in a minute. How this waiver is approved is it's ridiculous. It really is. It makes no logical sense. Now, part of the waiver issue here also has to do with the fact that California has closed 17% of its refinery capacity in the past 2 years, meaning that California does not have the means to make enough gasoline and diesel for itself, which is crazy considering they have oil coming from Alaska, they have oil coming out of California, but they can't refine their own friggin' oil. They were getting a lot of this diesel and gasoline from Asia because it was easier to transfer it from across the Pacific. Now they got to get it from the U.S., which means through the through the Gulf, through the Panama Canal to the United States. And there is not enough Jones Act compliant tankers to do this, and this is where the waiver is coming in.
But I don't think a Jones Act waiver, an unending and frankly useless Jones Act waiver, is supporting the Maritime Action Plan. It's kicking out one of the legs from under the table that the U.S. has for domestic shipbuilding. Do you agree with that statement?
Thank you, sir. The Jones Act waiver, of course, was done by the Department of War and Homeland Security. We were not advised until the end that it was going to happen, and we were not consulted. But the fact is, it's the administration policy, and I support.
So Captain Carmel is a government-appointed official who can be removed by the government based on what he says. So he's got to say that, I support the policy of the administration. I'm not. And I can tell you what I say is like, that's crap. I mean, there's no way you should support this. Did you hear how this waiver is initiated? It goes through the Department of War Defense, and then it goes to Department of Homeland Security. At no time is the Maritime Administration, the shipping arm of the U.S. government informed, asked their opinion, anything. They are not told about the waiver technically until 10 days, not after it's granted, after the voyage is completed. That's when they're told. That's when they're told. This would be like allowing a foreign airline to operate within the confines of the United States, which foreign airlines can, but they can't move passengers. It'd be like allowing Lufthansa to move a load of passengers from New York to Chicago, and the way you get the waiver is by asking the U.S. Air Force and then approved by the Department of Homeland Security, and then only afterwards do you tell the FAA. I mean, no other... This is a phrase I like to use here recently, and I've been using it quite a bit, is batshit crazy. And that's exactly what this is. It's like, how does this exist? Now, it does exist. The 501A waiver, which is what's been approved here, allows the Department of War/Defense to approve these waivers. The problem is nobody in that department knows crap about ships. They don't. And even the Navy doesn't know about ships. They don't know about commercial shipping. And the fact that they don't even go to the Maritime Administration or the Federal Maritime Commission is absolutely nuts. Now, later in the hearing, Representative John Garamendi notes that there is a proposal to include a modification to the 501 waiver that's going to be put into the National Defense Authorization Act for 2027. But as of right now, Carmel and the Maritime Administration have no say in this.
You know, the fact is it's the administration policy, and I support, what I'm.
Well, it's a horrible policy. It was done to cut gas prices, and gas prices have gone up since the waiver. And I wouldn't make the ridiculous argument that issuing the Jones Act waiver resulted in higher gas prices, but it was designed, or we were told it was put in place to decrease gas prices, and it has not done that either. And in addition to that, as I understand, as well, that the president had to determine it was in the interest of national defense. Yet in MARAD's posting of vessels that have taken advantage of the Jones Act waiver, several voyages list, quote, non-applicable in the explanation of national defense interests. So why is the administration allowing vessels to take advantage of the waiver if the operator can't even bother to explain the national security interest of the waiver's use?
Yes, sir. Again, the way this works under 501A, we are not involved in that process at all. Not at all. We are not consulted before a waiver is issued, and in fact, we generally officially are not told about it until 10 days after the voyage ends. We publish, when we are notified 10 days after the voyage ends, we publish it within, I forget the number of days, but number of days right after that. And we've been successful at doing that.
I wouldn't quite tote that as a success. My problem I have, even with what MARAD posts, is that there is no assessment about whether or not there are U.S. commercial ships available. Supposedly CBP, Customs and Border Protection, are doing that. But if you don't have the Maritime Administration doing this, again, this is the agency tasked under the Department of Transportation to oversee U.S. Maritime. It makes no sense. Carmel and the Maritime Administration are not finding out about this till 10 days after a voyage. And what we're seeing is, you look at some of these voyages, it's like, is there an urgent need? At what point is Florida running out of gasoline that you have to put in a foreign ship to move it? Because what we're seeing a lot of is movement of cargo over to other ports, and then foreign ships lifting that same or similar cargo out of those ports to bring them overseas. That's the thing that Department of Defense War is not looking at. And this is the criticality of this waiver system. The Maritime Administration has an uphill battle. It was gutted by DOGE. When DOGE came in, the Maritime Administration lost a lot of people. We've seen a lot of people leave since then also, and you have a very small number of people who are at the Maritime Administration. And the Maritime Administration needs to be literally restructured, rebuilt from the bottom up. It has some key issues it has to deal with. It's dealing with a crumbling U.S. Merchant Marine Academy at Kings Point. It's dealing with the tanker security, the maritime security, and the cable security fleet. It's dealing with the fact that you had foreign companies come in and offer massive amounts of money. CMA CGM offered to reflag 20 ships into the U.S. fleet. We got one. Why was that not followed up upon? There's a lot of questions that need to be asked, and the Maritime Administration has to deal with that. I feel bad for Captain Carmel. He's got a tough job ahead. It's easy for me from the cheap seats to throw grenades at it, but I am, because I think this needs to be done. One of the things that I think was missed here is that if there are Jones Act waivers, well, that answers a question that Captain Carmel was asking, and that's cargo. If there is need to move oil and fuel from the Gulf Coast to the West Coast to Puerto Rico up to the East Coast, and that's the cargo that Captain Carmel was talking about. Where's the proposal to put more Jones Act tankers, more TSP tankers that can work both foreign trade and domestic trade? Where's that plan? Because to me, this is where you do it. And hey, we're going to build these new Jones Act tankers that can be in the reserve fleet. They can be activated as needed by commercial firms. And hey, you know what? They have nuclear power plants on board. And when they're in layup, they can be hooked into grids and provide power back into the system. I mean, again, we got to be thinking outside the box here, people. Commissioner DeBello's got a lot on her plate right now. There's a lot of investigation to go through. $40 million, I would ask for a little more. I think if Congress is willing to throw some money at you, grab some more money, because you can bring more data entry. You can bring more enforcement out. You can bring more people on. But again, first year, tough job to do coming into it. Lot to be looking at right now. But I do think what we're going to see out of this disruption coming out of the Persian Gulf is for more oversight in global shipping. We've seen it since the very beginning of this channel back in 2021 when Ever Given went sideways in the Suez. And that was kind of my conversation I had yesterday up at George Washington University talking to the senior executives there about this. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. I want to take a moment and thank everyone who's been sending me shirts. I've received a batch of shirts recently in the mail that are coming my way. I just have one comment, and listen, I don't want to look a gift horse in the mouth at all, but one quick comment here. This is a really big shirt. I know that the camera adds 10, 20 pounds to you at times. I am not a triple X. I'm at most a large. That's what I wear. The one thing when people meet me in person, there's two things that they commonly note at. One of them is I'm a little bit shorter than most people think of. And second, I am not as large as I appear on TV. Listen, I love the shirts. I appreciate it. And I can make a couple of shirts out of this. But if you do want to send something, hey, large is the size shirt that I wear. But I do appreciate it. Hey, I hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you did, hey, take a moment, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell so be alerted about new videos as they come out. Leave a comment, share it across social media, and if you can, support the page. How do you do that? Well, you can give it a big thumbs up. You can hit the super thanks button down below or head on over to Patreon and become a